Welcome to the Roadmap for Assessing Meaningful Participation, or the RAMP webinar. The RAMP is a step-by-step process for gathering critical information about the child interests and everyday activities and priorities, which lead to the development of participation-based IFSP outcomes and strategies. The RAMP is a process, not just a one-time questioning or interview. It's a process with steps including asking questions, learning about interests and routines, and then observing the family during a chosen priority or routine. All of these components then build your participation-based IFSP outcomes. So the RAMP is a three-step process. Step 1 looks at identifying and analyzing caregiver priorities for child learning and activity settings, along with successful caregiver responsive strategies. Part 2 is observing and assessing meaningful participation, where you're observing the adult and child in an activity setting, and you're also developing additional or alternative activities and responsive strategies that the caregiver can try during their daily routines. And then part 3 of the RAMP is that planning component. And this is where you're asking if there are other things you should know about or that are priorities of the caregiver, and then looking at developing and creating that IFSP. The RAMP has a manual that describes the 3 steps of the process, and there's a roadmap for each of those 3 steps of the RAMP process. These roadmaps guide you through each part of the process. It incorporates reflective questions, which are the green boxes on each of those roadmaps, opportunities to brainstorm and or provide information or informative feedback, which are those gold boxes. There are also opportunities for the parent and or the practitioner to model or try something new while the other observes. Those are the blue boxes. And then there's an overall note-taking workbook for identifying child interests and activity settings, which are the purple arrows. The workbook has different pages where you can gather all of the information that you're learning about from that caregiver. So there's a part 1 gathering information workbook, which includes child interest information, activity setting information, and parent responsiveness information. There's part 2 of the workbook, which is the observing and assessing meaningful participation section. And then there's a part 3 of the workbook, which is the planning section, where you're looking at developing those possible participation-based IFSP outcomes. There is also an additional resource, which is the initial referral to IFSP flowchart. This is kind of a mapped out process of how you can use each step of the RAMP and incorporate that into your 3 visits, 1 for each part of that RAMP process. So you have visit 1, which is step 1 of the RAMP process, where you're explaining the program to a family, going through the rights, procedural safeguards, getting consent forms that are needed. And then you're gathering information, including child interest information, activity setting information, and parent responsiveness information. And you're documenting that information in part 1 of the workbook. Visit 2 or step 2 of the process could happen 2 different ways. If a child is automatically eligible, then visit 2 or step 2 of the RAMP process would be completing that functional assessment, and could also then incorporate part 3 right then and there, where you're starting to develop those IFSP outcomes. Or if eligibility still needs to be determined, then visit 2 is where you're looking at completing that testing and evaluation as needed. And then step 3 or visit 3 is where you would complete that functional assessment after you finished the evaluation and you're developing those participation-based IFSP outcomes. So part 1, gathering information, is not yet part of the assessment. We are still just figuring out what are the concerns of the caregiver and is the child eligible. So this step 1 is intended to gather information about the parent's priorities related to the child's participation in family or community activities, and also some of those challenges or barriers that the family may be experiencing due to the child's present level of development. This is an opportunity to begin that caregiver interaction, that coaching style with families right away during part 1, where we're able to gather that information and also share that information or give informative feedback to caregivers. This opportunity begins that relationship building process and allows caregivers to see us as helpful and supportive resources, so that if the child is determined to be not eligible for service, we're still able to share some information with the caregiver that they can build upon. And then if that child and family happen to come back through, we've already begun those interactions using that coaching interaction style, and we've already started that relationship building process. The practitioner ends this step 1 or part 1 of the RAMP process with a conversation with a plan to identify a member of the EI team to observe the caregiver and child during an everyday activity or routine that the parent has prioritized. Completion of part 1 of the RAMP is expected to take approximately 45 to 60 minutes. So you will notice that some routines-based gathering tools start with asking caregivers about activity settings, about routines that they often engage in as a family, and also interests. And then once you collect that information, you are able to determine what are some of the needs or priorities of the family or caregiver. With the RAMP, it starts with asking the caregiver what is their priority or what do they want their child to be able to do, and it builds from there. Let's take a look at an example of what the RAMP Part 1 gathering information process could sound like once a referral is made for a child and when you're first meeting that child after intake. Okay, we're going to start with the RAMP Part 1 gathering information process. I am the practitioner and Sonia is the caregiver, and she has a little boy named Jack. And we are going to start on the part 1 roadmap with that purple circle where we're figuring out what does the caregiver want for their child. So, hi Sonia. So what is your priority for Jack, or what do you want him to be able to do?
So he cries a lot. It's very hard to soothe him, and I would love for him to cry less, or at least know how to soothe himself more than he does now.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that? A little bit more about when Jack cries all the time and what that looks like?
Sure. Well, he cries a lot all day long. Afternoons are definitely worse than the mornings, like especially once we pick up his brother from school and get home. And it's not always obvious what he's crying about.
Okay, so now we're going to move into section B, where we talk about and you get information from the caregiver about what they've already tried to help their child be able to do whatever that priority is. Okay, Sonia, so what have you tried to help Jack not cry as much?
We try the normal like parent stuff, like feed him, change him. He loves his pacifier. We use it a lot. I know there's lots of opinions about pacifiers, but it's working right now, and that is definitely something that works. That kid loves movement, which is fine, but I'm exhausted and I do not want to be moving all day. He does love the swing and the bouncy chair. I think he's probably in it too much, but it works. So we use it, and I don't always know what else to do. Um, he, we figured out like really big movements will calm him. So like if I hold him and I like do squats, that's not super fun. I don't enjoy that. It works, but I don't love it. Um, his dad has figured out this is embarrassing, if we buckle him in his car seat and like really big, as big as you can, where we're not going to tip him upside down, any really big movement calms him, but I don't enjoy it and I'm kind of tired.
So now we're going to move to part C on the roadmap, where we're going to ask the caregiver what worked and what didn't work of those ideas and strategies that they've tried. So Sonia, of all those strategies and things that you've tried to get Jack to not cry as much or to be able to soothe himself more, which of those worked? Which of those didn't work for you?
Okay, so the pacifier always works. Like it's still not the longest term solution, but the pacifier almost always works. Feeding him will help in the moment, but like there's days where I could feed him like every hour just as a soothing technique. And some days it happens because I really do not know what else to do, but it is not a long-term solution. Again, the swing and the bouncy chair work, and he could be in there a really long time. I'm pretty sure that's not good for babies, but again, it's something about the movement that will definitely work. We've also tried things like, oh, maybe he's hot. Let's take his clothes off. And it's like, well, I don't know, maybe that helped, maybe it didn't. It's definitely not like an easy fix. And of course we do all the normal parent things like sing to him, talk to him, bounce him around. It feels like it always takes something big and it's never long term.
So now this is where we're at one of the yellow boxes on the roadmap, where this is an opportunity for us as practitioners to provide some informative feedback to the caregiver, thinking about the things and information that they just shared with you. So, it sounds like you've done a lot of things to help Jack, and you are definitely recognizing his cues that he's telling you that he needs something when he's doing all of that crying. I also hear you recognizing that he likes movement, but you also want that movement experience to be enjoyable for you too. So especially when it comes to doing all those squats, that may be a little bit difficult. And you had mentioned that you're feeling tired. And it sounds like you have some questions about the strategies that you're using, and whether or not they're appropriate strategies, and if there are some other strategies that might be helpful for you. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you captured everything that I said. I especially am wondering about like the swing and the bouncy seat, because he could be in there a really long time, and some days I don't know what else to do. So he's in there for an hour or more, because if I pick him up, the crying starts, and I've changed you and I fed you, and I would like him to be able to soothe in other ways. And, I would like to be able to enjoy my baby without feeling like I always have to do something to you. Like, can we just hang out? Because right now we're not just hanging out.
Thank you for sharing all that information, Sonia. So now we're at the part D of our roadmap, where we're looking at and trying to determine with the caregiver what are some different opportunities throughout their activities and daily routines that we can practice the priority that this caregiver has given us. So Sonia, what routines or parts of your day might be good times to practice getting Jack to soothe himself and not cry as much?
I have to kind of think. So, like, he does like playing on the floor. Again, it's short term, like with toys or books or whatever he's reaching for, stuff like that. But I do wonder if there's a way to keep him happier longer. And I'm not thinking for like an hour. Like, I realize he's a baby, but like I see him with other babies and they're happier a lot longer than he is. So if there's a way to like keep him happier longer, the daycare picking him up, or picking up his brother, I call the bewitching hour, because it's just so awful for all of us. I mean, that feels the most like immediate need to fix, but I also realize that might be the hardest.
So now we're at section E of the RAMP Part 1 roadmap. And this is the point where we begin to gather what are some interests of the child and what are some activity setting information that the caregiver can share with us so that we're able to determine and help support meeting that need of the caregiver through a variety of routines. So there's lots of opportunities to be able to practice. So Sonia, how do you tell when Jack is happy? Like, how do you know that? What happens?
So, when he's in the swing and he's not crying and he's just looking around smiling, like he's pretty happy. He, like, when we're with him, he smiles and babbles and reacts to us, like, just, I don't know, kind of the like normal baby stuff that he does. And then like when he starts to get upset, he kind of starts to do that like wiggle and that like, we call it, oh God, or his brother will say his timer's going off. And it's kind of like, you can just tell it's starting to happen. It doesn't go from 0 to 100, but he just kind of starts to whine. And then once we're gone, like it's going to be hard to calm him.
And how do you know when he's upset? Like, does he immediately start crying and blowing up? Or is there kind of that slow warm up where you're starting to notice that this might escalate into him being fully upset and crying?
Yeah, it's more of that slow warm up where he'll just kind of start to make this sound that's different from his happy sound. I guess I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah, like that's when his brother will go, his timer's going off, and that's kind of, I'm not describing it very well, but it's definitely like a slow, gradual, I'm starting to get upset. It's not 0 to 100.
So now this is the point in the part 1 process where we are going to summarize all of that information, and then we're going to move to figure out what is that joint plan or next step. When would be a good time for us to do an observation, and what routine would be helpful for us to be able to see what's happening and then to offer some support and continue that process. And that is section F, so that joint plan section. So Sonia, our next step in this process is to observe you and Jack in one of the routines that you had talked about, where maybe Jack seems to cry a lot. What would be most helpful activity for us to be able to observe?
I think like once we get home from picking up his brother, because I think you'll see everything that we've talked about, he will be upset. I will do deep knee bends. I will do everything that I know might work or not work. And he will eventually probably end up in this one.
So if you as an individual or a program or team would like to practice listening for certain things within part 1, gathering information process, this is where you may choose to pause the webinar. You may choose to rewatch that practice video and take out a piece of paper and jot down what are the parent priorities that you heard during that video? What has the parent already tried? listen for what Jack's interests are, and what activity settings were identified as possible opportunities to work on that priority. And while you're watching the video and listening for those 4 items, you can be documenting the information that you're hearing in the workbook in the Part 1 Gathering Information section, which includes the child interests page and the activity settings page. So here is an example of a completed Part 1 workbook based on the video that we just watched between the early interventionist and Sonia, the parent, and about her son, Jack. So we heard Sonia talk about a priority for Jack, that she didn't want him to cry all the time and she wanted him to be able to soothe himself. We heard a variety of activities that she had tried, including feeding him, changing him, giving him a pacifier. We talked about some different strategies that worked for her, as well as some strategies that she tried that didn't work. So we were able to gather that information. And we were also able to learn about some other activities or routines in her day that might be a good time to practice getting Jack to be able to soothe himself. We ended that conversation with developing our joint plan and determining when would be a good time or activity of the caregiver's day to be able to observe that priority. And Sonia identified the afternoon or after picking up the brother from school. So then we look at the activity setting page of the workbook. And this is where we were listening for what activity settings could be places where this is the actual child interest page where we looked at what are the different child interests of Jack. So what makes him smile, what excites him. So Sonia talked about swinging in the swing, sitting in a bouncy seat, using the pacifier, and movement. She really mentioned those deep knee bends or those squats, and that movement component being very helpful in soothing Jack. Now we're moving to the activity setting page in the workbook, where we're able to document the different activity settings and what happens during those activities or routines that Sonia had shared with us. So she shared with us about mealtime and eating. She shared a little bit about play. She talked about going to pick up the brother from school. And she also talked about different ways that she gets Jack to be able to soothe himself, different routines or activities like putting him in the bouncy seat, giving him a pacifier, and doing those squats or deep knee bends. So those are examples of a completed Part 1 workbook. You will have access to all of these resources, and I will show you how to access those at the end of this webinar. So this is an example of if you chose to, let's say you have an existing family and you wanted to do some practice with the ramp, that Part 1 gathering information. This is an example of a video where you've been providing services to a family, and throughout your visits, you've been able to collect some of this information about child interests, about activity settings, parent responsiveness, and you're able to compile that information to be used at a 6-month review or annual IFSP. So this video is an example of an existing family where visits have been taking place, and we're completing that RAMP Part 1 process at a 6-month review. This is an example of the RAMP Part 1 gathering information process to be completed at a 6-month review or annual IFSP. So this is a practice video to show you what it could look like and sound like during those times. So the setup for this family and the situation is as you're completing your home visits, you have an opportunity to gather information about child interest and activity settings while you're doing visits, while you're having conversations with caregivers, and while you're supporting them with their family priorities. And by doing that, you can then support your RAMP conversation at your 6-month review or your annual IFSP by gathering that information during your weekly, bi-weekly, monthly home visits. So during your visit, the parent states that this little girl named Chloe loves to play catch with a ball and is really interested in her Little People Castle set. She loves being in the kitchen when mom cooks and helps mom put items in the dishwasher. So right there, you're able to gather some child interests as you're building your relationship with the family and getting to know Chloe as well. Based on Chloe's IFSP, she's working on being more mobile in her home, specifically with the steps and communicating with her family. So using more words and putting 2 words together. So I am the early interventionist in this practice video, and Karen is Chloe's mom in this practice video. And we are going to walk through the RAMP Part 1 gathering information roadmap through this conversation that could potentially take place at a 6-month review or IFSP annual meeting, and you'll be able to use this information then. Okay, so we're going to start at point A, which is parent priority. And you'll notice that I'll just shift these questions just a little bit to bring in some of the previous experiences that you as the early interventionist and mom and Chloe have been working on during the visits for the past 6 months or during the past school year. So hi, Karen. When we wrote your IFSP, you had talked about your priorities for Chloe and what you wanted her to be able to do.
Yeah, I really want Chloe to be able to be more mobile in our house. So being able to go up and down the stairs independently so I don't have to carry her. And it would be really nice if she could tell me what she wants or what she needs.
Yeah, can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so she refuses to crawl or walk up and down the stairs, which means I have to carry her. And she's getting older and she's not quite as light as she used to be. So it would be really nice if she could do that independently. Right now, she's also only using a few words, single words, to maybe let me know what she wants, but it often turns into crying or whining or just a complete meltdown. She'll point every once in a while and it helps a little, but if she's not being specific, it can be unhelpful as well.
Yeah, and so we've been working on some strategies during our visits, and you've been incorporating those strategies throughout your day. So what have you tried to help Chloe be more mobile and to communicate more with you so that you can tell really what she wants?
So she's saying some single words like help and play and eat. She's starting to say all done every once in a while when she's done eating. I try to get her to imitate me to say more words or put 2 words together. When it comes to walking up the stairs, she'll take 1 step at a time, but then drop to her hands and knees. So I've tried having her hold my hand, or I've tried to have her hold the railing so she could be independent, like when I'm not there, or when I'm walking behind her and maybe carrying the laundry, she would be able to hold the railing.
Yeah, those are some great strategies. And of those strategies that you've tried, which of those have worked for you, which didn't work for you and Chloe?
So holding my hand up the stairs works a little. She'll take at least a few steps as opposed to just the one that she is typically doing. The railing did not work. I think maybe it made her feel a little unbalanced, having that one arm up or just being more independent like that. And then having her imitate words works sometimes as long as she's not already into that whining, kind of crying fit or tantrum at the time.
Yeah, so you've tried lots of strategies to help Chloe, and she's made some great progress in her skills. And I know that you want to keep working on those to get her to that point that you feel is very successful for her. So would it be okay if I shared some thoughts with you on those strategies?
Yes, absolutely. Anything to help.
Great. So during our visits, we talked about what Chloe was really interested in and what she liked to do or play with during the day. Do you recall when we talked about that and those things that she really liked?
Yeah, I remember telling you how much she liked to play catch and how much she really liked to play with her little people castle. She also really likes to help me in the kitchen, especially when I'm cooking or with the dishwasher.
Yes, exactly. And so, what we know about child interests is that the more interested a child is in the activity, the more or longer that child will be able to engage and participate and be able to expand those skills. So, what do you think about that?
That is helpful to know, because then maybe I can use a ball or maybe I can put some of those little people on the steps. And if she sees them, she'll be motivated to go get them. And that can keep her interested rather than just focusing on like walking up the steps, as you know, it doesn't really seem very motivating to her on its own.
Those are some great ideas. You came up with some great strategies to use her child interests to be able to expand what you want her to be able to be doing, like walking up the steps. You don't have to carry her up the steps all the time. And so, what routines or parts of your day have you been practicing those strategies to help Chloe?
Sure. Well, we go up the stairs a lot, throughout the day because her bedroom's up there and like all of the toys and the toy room is up there. So that just happens kind of throughout the day. And I'm also in the kitchen a lot, as you can imagine. You know, there's breakfast, lunch, dinner, all of those kinds of things. So I've been working on that word imitation when we're in the kitchen, like while she's requesting food or, you know, asking for something in the kitchen.
Yeah, so those are great routines to be able to practice some of those skills. And it sounds like those are routines that happen often during your day. And so you may be able to just incorporate some of these strategies into those routines that are happening often. Are there other things or new things that Chloe's interested in since our last visit that you can think of?
Yeah, she's really started to become interested in looking at books. That's new, so that's been really fun. And she got a new baby doll, from her grandma, so she's been carrying that everywhere.
So thinking about those other interests, what are some other routines or activities during your day? So I know you had already talked about going up the stairs happens quite often because the toy room and the playroom is up there. And you also talked about being in the kitchen quite a bit. Are there other routines or activities during your day where you could potentially practice some of these strategies and work on Chloe being more mobile and being able to communicate with you better?
Yeah, I think, maybe we've started to incorporate books at nap time, and that seems like she really enjoys it. So maybe while we're looking at some books together and she's quiet and calm, I could, have her imitate words or pictures that I see in the book, and that could really help her to communicate more. And maybe practicing the mobility, we could look at the books like by her crib, but the bookcase is across the room, so it might be motivating for her to go get a new book or, to get something new to look at, and that could get her kind of walking back and forth.
Great ideas and strategies, Karen. Okay, so then you would follow up this conversation with developing your joint plan. So that was an example of what a ramp part one could look like with an existing family that you could potentially begin or use that ramp process at a 6 month review or an annual IFSP. So then we move into part two of the ramp, which is the observation. And this is what is scheduled. This is that part of that joint plan that is scheduled at the end of your part one or your visit one. This is considered part of the assessment now. This is where you're able to greet the caregiver, revisit the joint plan from the previous visit. You're able to observe the parent priorities concerns in the typical routine or activity. You're able to support, modify, model some strategies, and you're really able to look for parent responsiveness. So what worked for that caregiver, what didn't work, and then how can you engage in a problem-solving conversation? And this information really helps support writing those participation-based IFSP outcomes. So there are two components to this visit 2 or step 2 of the process. If the child is automatically eligible, you can complete that observation and that functional assessment, and also tie in that part 3 or step 3 of the RAMP process, which is that IFSP conversation. If you are needing to determine eligibility for a child, then step 2 or part 2 of this process is where you would incorporate that testing and evaluation as needed. So here is an example of what part 2 of the workbook looks like when it's completed. So you have information after you've done that observation where you're able to ask questions like, how did that match what typically happens or what you wanted to have happen during that activity? What ideas do you have to improve that activity? What worked? What could be done differently? And then you're able to either do some observing and also potentially some modeling and supporting the caregiver with new ideas. So step 3, part 3 of the RAMP is a continuation of part 2 if that child is deemed already eligible. And the team can use this information to help the caregiver with identifying IFSP outcomes and intervention strategies. If you used your visit 2 to complete the evaluation or to do some testing, then part 3 would be that conversation of developing those IFSP outcomes and intervention strategies. So this part also builds on previous discussions targeting caregiver priorities. It's a summarization of the information gathered, and it ends with a joint plan for those continued parent-child interactions and visits by the practitioner. Here's an example of what part 3 of the workbook looks like when it's been completed. So this is where you are able to ask, what else would you like to have happen? So if there are other family priorities, this is where that conversation can take place. And since you already gathered information about activity settings and child interests in part 1, you're able to incorporate that information into these other caregiver priorities as well and develop your participation-based IFSP outcomes. So now let's hear from a team who has been using the RAMP in their program for approximately 6 to 9 months. And they're just going to share some of their experiences, some of their ideas, some of their successes, and also some of their challenges and solutions that they came up with.
Hello, everyone. We are here today to talk about our experiences and ideas, opinions about the roadmap for assessment of meaningful participation tool, otherwise known as the RAMP. I'm Jamie Anderson, a speech language pathologist that works with Robbinsdale Early Intervention.
And I'm Stephanie LeBans, physical therapist with the Robbinsdale Early Intervention team. Jamie and I were just reflecting a little bit. We think we've had access to the RAMP for about 9 months now, which was very interesting timing looking at the grand scheme of things. But I think the shift to distance learning made it just that much more helpful in getting families accustomed to having us observe them doing their regular routines that they do with their children. So just to start off with things that we really appreciated about the ramp, it gives us an opportunity to begin observing and coaching much sooner in our relationship with the family than we may have otherwise done. Rather than having families tell us, we're having them show us. And there are just embedded opportunities to have a little bit of feedback as a result of that. For writing your IFSPs, we're tending to find that we're writing fewer goals, really focusing on what we need to get started with a child, what we need to get started with a family, and having those goals that are written really have immediate meaning to the family as well. So it's definitely more of a concrete shared vision, as well as an opportunity on the IFSP to really be able to call out the strengths and strategies that are already in place with the family, the caregivers, and the child in their day. And for people who are learning the ramp, it's literally a script that you can follow as you're learning, depending on your learning style and how you present information and ask questions. You might find things on it that are a little bit more useful than others, but it was really neat to see one of our team members who was a newer graduate, who was new to everything, just really embrace it and follow it and have some really great results.
One way we've been tying it back to the equip practices is thinking about breaking up the ramp in our minds and thinking, okay, we're using a coaching style of interaction, using reflective questions, any feedback that we might want to offer during the ramp. But with the outcome, we're hoping to get all of the information we need about the family's natural learning environment. And so there's the 3 tenets: child interest, parent responsiveness, and the activity setting, how they spend their day. And so it might be a little overwhelming to get the manual and read all about it, see all those flow charts. But if you just can kind of simplify it in your mind and think you're trying to gain the information about the 3 tenets of natural learning environment practices.
All right, and then just on to a few challenges with solutions that we've encountered. We've definitely had inconsistency with how it's been embraced by different members of our team, what portions of the ramp really seem like they are being helpful for different members of the team. We did get support from our PDF through the Centers of Excellence just to do a little bit of reflection and action planning around that, just to ensure that people are on the same page and understand how it supports us in supporting children and their caregivers. And it's a new thing. When new things can seem like big challenges, new things can seem overwhelming. Learning new things on top of the responsibilities that you already have, and in distance learning, it can be a little bit much. So it just, as with learning anything else new, it's going to take a growth mindset. It's going to take trying things and having successes, and trying things and having learning experiences.
Some of the feedback that we originally heard when we got it was, this seems like a lot of visits added to before the IFSP is even signed. But one of the things we're learning, just like Stephanie said, is that you're getting into coaching way earlier than we would have originally. And so even before the IFSP signed, if we're completing all parts of the ramp, we will have already observed the family and understand what they've tried, how it could look, and offer strategies even before the IFSP is signed. Some of the things that have helped us is to consider flexible scheduling. So in our minds, we kind of have it all plotted out weekly. So, the eval, and then the next visit might be the eval share, and the next visit, going on that. But consider doing shorter visits, especially for the observation opportunities in ramp part 2. So for example, I did a ramp part 2 with a couple families, and the routines that they wanted to observe didn't naturally line up back to back. So I did 2 shorter 30-minute observations in 1 week as a way to just reduce the amount of time that it goes on and on before the IFSP is signed. And of course, if you're using the flexible activity-based burst of service scheduling, the FAB scheduling, that can kind of help with the scheduling part of it. Another thing that we've encountered is kind of just, we show up and we start asking all these questions about what's their day look like, What would they like them to learn? What are they interested in? And so one thing that's been helpful is to create scripts for all of those parts. For example, when you ask about child interest, you might start with, one thing we know is that when children are interested, they'll engage for longer. The longer they're engaged, the more learning opportunities they have. And so today, would it be okay if I asked you about some of your child's interests? So that has been very helpful to think about the why and how to concisely explain it to families.
And then how do you get started? I think we just found out that you just start and just try some things out and see how it goes. I think we've had the most ease with trying out the ramp with new families as they're getting started. It's just a natural part of that flow when you're getting started with someone new. If you get some of that practice with new families, and then you're able to transfer some of those questions or observation opportunities into a 6-month review or an annual, it will certainly help you just smooth out that practice as you have more opportunities to do that. And then as far as getting new families started with the process, I think Jamie mentioned, just having your little elevator speech about why we would do the ramp as part of the evaluation process. And even from that point of that initial intake call, making sure that those people who are making those initial contacts with the families are using that language about observing your family in your naturally occurring environments and routines as the foundation for early intervention.
Previously, before we received the ramp, we were doing our best attempts at the routines-based interview, the RBI. And so that's what we mostly compare the ramp to, because that has been the most recent assessment tool. We do like the RBI. It's nice to have that background knowledge of engagement, independence, and social relationships, the 3 components that form what you get from the RBI. However, a couple things in contrast is that we had found that when we did the RBI, it almost set us up for couching with the family. In other terms, just talking, not doing a lot of watching. Kind of a big contrast to talk for an hour to an hour and a half, and then come the next visit and expect it to be all observation. And then the other thing is that we ended up getting a lot of goals with RBIs, and some of them would just not be meaningful or relevant by the time we got to them. And it would be a little overwhelming for some families to see upwards of 10 goals on their IFSP, in contrast to the ramp, where we're just doing 2, maybe 3 activity settings, and then possibly doing periodic reviews sooner, or more than 1 in a 1-year period for the IFSP. We really appreciate the flow charts on the ramp because it gives you pretty much the script that you need to say, and it helps you just figure out how to navigate that conversation. So, sorry. Thank you so much. We wish you the best of luck, and happy ramping. Hello, everyone.
So we've come to the end of our RAMP webinar. All of the resources that we talked about today during this webinar, as well as additional resources that you may want to check out, can be found on the Equip Share site. So here is the Equip Share site. And if you go to Natural Learning Environment, and in that dropdown, you see the ramp. And if we click on the ramp, this is where we're able to locate all of the resources, as well as the practice videos that you heard during this webinar today. And here are some additional resources as well to help support your ramp process. Thank you so much for listening to our ramp webinar. If you have additional questions about the ramp and would like to talk through those questions, please reach out to your Minnesota Centers of Excellence Professional Development Facilitator, or your PDF for short, and they would be happy to help support that conversation. Thank you.